in order for us to actually succeed and come up with solutions to some of the more increasingly complex problems in this world, you need the diversity of thought.
What do you think some of the disruptions coming up in law are that maybe we're not talking enough about?
No real progress can be made without taking any risk. Excellent.
If you were to predict the energy space 10 years from now, does it look any different? If so, what does it look like?
In order for you to build the teams, it's really building the right environment for everybody to thrive. That's really what success looks like when you have a great team.
Karen, thank you for joining me here today. I've been looking forward to our podcast for a long, long time. And I was reminded of it when we ran into the airport last week, completely coincidental in Toronto. And we would have missed each other within a fraction of a second. And yet there we were in an amazing coincidence.
Absolutely. So good to see you always, even for a fraction of a moment, and happy to be here today.
And Karen, while we've had an opportunity and the good fortune to know one another for some time, many people many of the listeners will be sort of looking at your story and be like, how do I replicate Karen's story? And let's get to know Karen a bit better, as whether it's as a legal professional, whether it's as an executive, whether it is because they like your career path and say, hey, how do we become Karen in the future? So
I don't know if they want to beat me, but happy to share.
Well, I mean, we spoke at a conference together, and there were a lot of people that wanted to be you. So I have a feeling there will be many in the audience that would. And I'll start with the basics, Karen, and very much tell us a bit about who Karen is, sort of where you grew up, and what sort of that initial upbringing was like. We know that the way we are brought up is such a big influence to who we become later on.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Gary. I mean, growing up influences our values and approach to life. And so for me, and my story begins in Vancouver. I was born and raised in East Vancouver for the early part of my childhood, and it had a real big impact on me. It was a neighborhood back then that had a lot of immigrants and refugees. It was very, very multicultural and a mosaic. And I have really strong, great memories of that time period. Just a lot of family time and a lot of cultural mix in my family with Chinese and Indian culture. My parents were born in India, and my grandma, who raised me a lot of the time, spoke Cantonese. And so, just a mix of cultures growing up, and that has influenced everything really about how I look at the world. Martial arts was a key part of growing up. I did that religiously. I did that 4 to 5 times a week from when I was 6 to when I was 22. And so I do think that, it built my sense of self, and also my focus on, hard work and practice, and just building my self-confidence, right? So that was really, really key. And then as I grew up, I kind of expanded my reach. I went to Mexico City and studied there as part of my undergrad, and really fell in love with Spanish language and Latin American culture. I came back from that experience, and while it was only 1 semester, I changed completely, and even my family noticed. It just opened my eyes to the world beyond what I knew. It also taught me that I was extremely privileged compared to many people on this earth. And it kind of gave me a sense of purpose. Like, that's when I realized that justice and advocacy was going to be part of my life. Back up to that point, I didn't know whether for sure I wanted to be a lawyer. It was always something, a possibility. But after that, I think that's when I really thought that could be a career for me. And then fast forward, I didn't know that. I thought it would be in human rights law, but I ended up articling and gaining all my experience in corporate law, which actually I have enjoyed immensely. And it's taken me, around the world as well. So I've really enjoyed my career.
Well, and Karen, while we've had an opportunity to know each other for some time, I didn't know about the martial arts piece as well. So that's why these are good, because it gives the audience an opportunity to really get to know you. And Karen, certainly it's one of the things I always recommend to people to travel, and sort of the opportunity to learn other cultures. It really helps us open some doors. And I mean, understanding and the way we approach the world can really change vastly once we have that exposure.
Exactly. And it kind of just teaches you, right, the empathy that there's so many different perspectives. And just your worldview isn't the worldview, right? And in order for us to actually succeed and come up with solutions to some of the more increasingly complex problems in this world, you need the diversity of thought. You need to have a multitude of different viewpoints around the table and a supportive, safe environment for all of that to happen. But you don't really get to that place of understanding that there are lots of great ideas all around you unless you're kind of immersed in a new environment where you're just a minority, you're just another voice. And I love that there's so much learning to that for sure. It still fascinates me.
And for anyone in the audience listening to us, will know that I'm always curious about people's upbringing and backgrounds. When I met Karen, I said, Uehara, I'm like, it's a Japanese last name, but I don't think you're Japanese. It really,
Very
it
good.
was dissecting the accuracy based on the name. So
Yeah,
that was
very
made for a good.
impressive. That comes from a well-traveled person who really understands names and faces, and that's a skill you have. But yeah, I my husband is Japanese, and so that Japanese culture has been a real big part of my now family, our family. But yeah, I married into that culture in a sense.
And Karen, the certainly we talked a bit about sort of a bit of your upbringing and the early days. Why law? How did you gravitate towards law? Did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer? Was it something that came up later?
It didn't. I just in university particularly, I think just very idealistic, wanting to change the world for the better. I really was focused on international development. I always thought I would gravitate towards Latin America, but I didn't have a tangible skill to offer. I just had all of the passion. And so as I was thinking of what further studies beyond my international relations degree, I thought, well, maybe agricultural economics, maybe something just more tangible, right? Or some sort of engineering. And I spoke with my dad, and he kind of convinced me, knowing that I have a bit of a travel bug, that maybe you could just do law, and then after you study law, maybe you can focus on, like, London or Tokyo, somewhere else, right? But he was just kind of concerned for me and I guess safety wise. But so I did it to appease my dad, but I think he won at the end of the day, when I ended up, yeah, just honestly staying in Calgary for most of my practice and my career, because I saw so much you could do with a law degree that was kind of wider and in breadth than I had originally imagined. So my dad's always right, and he's my hero. So I give him all the credit for sure.
And so then, Karen, walk us a bit through the early stages of your career. So once you became a lawyer, because you were in Vancouver. I know for a while you also worked out of Europe, but then how did you end up in Calgary? And sort of, I think for a lot of people that journey can be interesting as well.
Yeah. So back then, I went to University of Saskatchewan Law School, an incredible law school, um, and I just took courses that I really wanted to take, and immerse myself, in the Jet Set mood and just anything that I really enjoyed, international law. But when it came time to seeking jobs and experience, a lot of the Calgary firms would come to Saskatchewan to recruit for summer positions. And so I was one of those that was recruited by McLeod Dixon, a really great law firm at that time, and now it's Norton Rose. But it just kind of opened the doors to, well, why not? Why not try this area? I recall the two people that came to interview me were both securities lawyers, and I am now, but at that moment in time, I had no idea. So I recall 5 minutes before my interview, I was Googling, what is a securities lawyer? Because I, I didn't know what that was. And honestly, it's just been just take every experience as it comes, right? I didn't have a predisposed notion that one, I would ever be in law. I never had a predisposed notion that I would move to any particular city. I was going to be open-minded to whatever the opportunities arose. And so when that opportunity arose and I summered there and articled there, I had a very like an excellent experience there. So Calgary to me was a new city, but it was super welcoming, very, very entrepreneurial, very so many, headquarters located there. So it just kind of perpetuated, right? Like all the contacts are there. And then I went in house after 7 years at the firm. And it just kind of opened my doors to also what else is out there, right? There's just so many headquarters here. So lots of learnings, and that opened the door for me to go, as you were mentioning, Gary, to Madrid, where I ended up practicing for 3 years. So just every door, when you're not set on what your path is and you're open to whatever path comes upon you and you're willing to open the doors, you usually end up surprised with what's on the other side. And every time I've opened a door, it's been a really, really big positive for me. So I really encourage others who are starting up in their careers to really just have that open mind and not be too narrowly focused, because often that leads to disappointment. Whereas in my path, like I never dreamt that I would have the job that I have today either. It just opens the doors to sort of anything that's possible.
No, and it's, I mean, that willingness to consider different things, you went from actually being thinking about doing international development in Latin America to working in the energy space, and I think that's, as a pivot, it requires open-mindedness and learning to adapt along the way.
For sure.
And
Yeah, lots of learning.
so, Karen, let me ask you a little bit about that, because it's a space. Sort of the energy space is concentrated in certain parts of the country and certain parts of the world as well, but it is very unique and certainly essential to everything we do. Sometimes we forget that we couldn't operate in any capacity if it wasn't for the energy that was us. What's that like? What's that been like for you, and what's it been like to be a lawyer sort of in that space, especially on the regulatory side?
Yeah,
Like
I
when you
mean,
think of
for me,
the corporate secretarial path, etc., like that requires a whole different path, and it's on its own.
for sure. Well, first on the energy piece, yeah, I think I need to be immersed in something that I believe in. And so, for me, energy, yeah, it's important for everything we do. It's important to the Canadian economy. It's important just to feel our way of life, right, that we're used to in a society. And so it's not going anywhere. It's just a matter of, yeah, like how our role is in ensuring that, that we're also playing a part in climate, solving climate change and that kind of thing globally, right? And so we have to really just focus on kind of the necessity around the world as opposed to, you know, different pockets of the country, say, having different views. And I think playing in that world has been so fascinating, whether it's been in an upstream capacity or a midstream company. You kind of see the full value chain and how it takes so many people and talents to actually ensure that an industry like that is successful, and serves the people that it needs to serve. So in my career, yeah, like because energy is such a key part of, say, um, Calgary and beyond, really, there's so many headquarters that you have a wide variety of legal jobs that are available within each company. So whether it's energy or any other kind of company, all large companies require regulatory lawyers. It just is really dependent on the regulatory framework for that company. All companies need commercial lawyers, business lawyers that really understand the business and the industry. You need corporate secretary lawyers if you're a public company with boards. You're also in, different jurisdictions. So, I've been in companies where it's Canadian headquartered, but there's international operations. And so really understanding that, or where there's a really important US Canada mix in the business. And so there's just so much. Yeah, litigation, of course, is a key part of everything, and environmental law is a really key part of everything as well. So all of this fuels, honestly, mini law firms, right, in companies, because you have the full gambit, and it's partly, ensuring that the team has really cool, high value work to do. But there's also enough to go outside to external counsel, right? There's just so much work to be done. It's fascinating.
Well, and it's very much that, Karen. It's that the space is much larger than sometimes people think. And there's, if I were to tell people how many lawyers work at some of the organizations you've worked in alone, it would be surprising to many people, I'm sure.
Oh yeah,
And
large law
but
firm
that's
size.
well, and I imagine, if you're somebody in law school, if you didn't have exposure to, especially even to a podcast like this, on learning sort of Karen's path, so to speak, you may not realize that, hey, there's an entire path in this industry that you wouldn't even know about if it wasn't for actually a conversation like this.
Absolutely. And what I'm getting though is a lot of really thoughtful questions and outreaches from students who are really thoughtful about, what does the career path look like? What could it be like? And I think when I was starting my career more than 20 years ago, it was about, you work in a law firm, that's how you gain your experience. You articled in law firms, you didn't article in-house. And I think some people now, especially more mature students, but all sorts of students, are saying, can I article in-house? And yes, there's opportunities, of course. And I love to be part of programs where we can offer articling to students in an in-house environment. But I also think, though, that there's a learning that comes from just being exposed to a lot of various industries, a lot of various clients, small, large, public, private, going public, and the startup situation, or already very, very, established public company. Do you think still that it's really important that people be exposed to that? Because then when you are narrowing your focus, because when you do choose an industry and an organization, you really need to know the ins and outs of that organization, but you bring with it so much experience from, whether you're working with counterparties that are small or private or whatever. You're bringing your experience to the lens of, what does the other side think? What does the other side value? How do we create a win-win situation if it's a commercial negotiation? If we haven't experienced what it feels like to represent that type of organization, it's very hard to bring that lens and judgment. So I do still recommend, but I love that, yeah, the career path is extremely broad, and I'm doing things now that I didn't know existed back then. I never grew up in a family that had anybody in law, really. So it was all just trial and error and really learning, wow, there's so many paths. And I think law schools now do a better job of really exposing that and bringing people in to talk about their paths. But we could probably do more so that people are energized by what the field involves.
When Karen, I know we talked a bit about sort of students and the career path, but in the process, you've had to build sizable teams, and with different skill sets to complement one another, from anything from dealing with stakeholders throughout the organization that can be uh, that come from a variety of walks of life with a variety of understanding of the subject matter that they're dealing with, but still with decision-making power. You've had team members that have to deal with regulatory items that are extremely sort of sensitive and require a lot of attention to detail. How do you build the right teams? What is the success to building a good team?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, that's the best part of my job, really, is building teams. But when I take a step back, I have to really look at, and I've learned over years that leadership is a great privilege and a responsibility, right? So, in order for you to build the teams, it's really building the right environment for everybody to thrive. That's really, what success looks like when you have a great team, is when everybody is super loving what they do, feels like they have the opportunities to learn and to engage, that they have, a lot of independence and ability to influence with our clients directly, and really influence the whole company, right, as a whole. That they're supported, that they're psychologically safe, like all of those pieces. And so for me, as a leader of teams and a builder of teams, it's really to understand my role. And a lot of it is, you're best as a leader when you hire people or have people around you that are smarter than you, that have sometimes more experience in a particular area than you. And it's a good thing, right? It's because you're winning as a whole team, not as individuals. So for me, it's really setting the vision and the purpose, really gathering us together and creating our own culture, um, and kind of showing everybody their ability to influence and be part of that vision, right? And one that is energizing in a way that everybody wants to join in. I think that's really key. So for me, entering into a new organization or a new team, it's really important that I have one-on-ones with every single member of the team as soon as possible. That is number one. So it's for me to get to know the team member on an individual level, like just their passions outside of work, because everything, right? Their life, their personal life influences um, their well-being at work. And so it's, families and where they're from and just that kind of thing. And then really understanding their work, what they're passionate about, what their experience was before their current role, so that I can really learn about, their path to where they are and then where they want to go. Because a lot of people, some people are happy in their role. And, in certain times in your life, you kind of change, right? You go through different times whether it's when the kids are young or old or whatever it is, but you just go through times in your life when you're just good with what you're doing. And then there's times in your life when you're really hungry and you want more, you're ready for more. And it's important for me to meet the team members where they're at, to see, how hungry are they? What are the areas in which they want to grow in? How can I make that happen? Or how do I keep that in my memory so that when an opportunity comes up in the future, near future, that I'm thinking about the right people? Because for me, having people super energized in the work they're doing is really part of the success. And I've really seen where individuals also, they're high achievers. Generally, legal professionals are high achievers, but if they shut the door and work really hard behind closed doors, they're just not going to be as part of a collective whole and part of a real purpose and vision as they would be if their doors were open, that they were collaborating, that they were learning from each other. And it's not me, forcing myself as leader upon them, but it's creating a environment where there's collaboration among the peers and that they feel like there's opportunities for them to continue to grow. And that's really, so that to me is, a lot of work, but it's really, really gratifying work for sure.
And Karen, I've had the opportunity to meet many of your team members, and it's been a very eclectic group, but you can tell how cohesive they are with one another, bringing together their passion. So I've
Love it.
seen this play out in real life, which is far more telling. And it's true that, a lot of the open door and the interactive piece doesn't necessarily come natural to all lawyers. Neither are we really properly trained that that's extremely valuable and that we should do more of that. Like often sort of legal training is, you put your head down, do the right research, provide the right answer, etc., which is, we know in to actually really add value in the ecosystem, it's far more complex than that. You actually have to be integrated, understand business needs, understand the needs of the rest of the department, and they all come together.
For sure. And when you have, I think, if you're used to working on a certain file in isolation and you want to provide the best service to your particular client, which in an organization can be a person, right? In a large group. But you don't realize that the person in the door shut next to you, in the office next to you, is working on something that, while isn't exactly the same, can, the information, whether it's related to a stakeholder, whether it's related to something else outside of the file, it could influence the advice you're giving in a good way, right? It just gives you a holistic picture. And I think the more, yeah, individuals are aware of the bigger picture about what drives the business, then they're able to really understand, okay, um, provide better advice perhaps, or just really have a better understanding of areas that they'd like to learn about.
And Karen, we've seen the evolution of law overall sort of evolve sort of by the day. You and I have even done a presentation together on technology, implement technology effectively, and sort of the challenges that can come with it, and how to do it effectively. But what do you think some of the disruptions coming up in law are that maybe we're not talking enough about?
I wish I had the
Put a
crystal ball,
predictive hat
Gary.
on.
Yeah, I wish I knew. What I do know, though, is I guess there's the pace of change is rapid right now, right? In terms of changing laws, changing regulations, changes to supply chain, changes geopolitically, just all sorts, right? And so it's not just that it affects law, but it's interesting how it does, because I think law maybe when you look when I studied in law school, it's pretty stagnant. It was based on precedent that was very very old. Things never really changed, and it was good. There was some sort of pleasure with that consistency, I guess. You knew kind of what it was going to be if it was rationally applied in, in a discrete set of circumstances, that what the outcome would be. I don't think life is so simple anymore. I just feel like there's a lot more flux. I think that's exciting. I do think that, it requires people to understand that it's okay to be ready, right? Whether it's existing risks to an industry or a company or what's emerging as a risk, and be really on top of that and not give legal advice that's in a vacuum based on history and precedent, but what's coming up ahead. I think that's where legal professionals really can provide more value than they ever maybe used to, or maybe they did, but like this is how I feel it takes to succeed in this time of this life, I guess, right now, where society is changing constantly. You wake up in the morning and things could have changed drastically, and so to be ready for that, to bring the teams forward, to bring the clients forward as well with your way of thinking, making sure you're aligned and resetting and ensuring that we're making the right decisions, the strategy is sound in light of the change. I think that's all part of what continues to come and affect the legal practice, and in a really cool way. And so I think technology has a role to play in that, Gary, because with the speed of change and the pace of change, requires the same number of individuals in an organization really to do more with less, in a sense, right? Or just to adapt differently, to be doing what they're doing. I always say like 80% of like what's in front of you, but 20% capability to make sure you have an eye on what's coming ahead. And if you
For sure.
don't do that, if you're focused right in front, you're gonna miss all of the other things that could be coming at you, whether they are risks or opportunities to the business. And that's a miss, right? If we miss out on that.
And Karen, I will just pull on that a little bit more, just in terms of the business value. I mean, you've always been very respected by business executives at your respective companies. What did you do to sort of to build that relationship and to make sure that you added value to the business? Because we know legal departments are often sort of challenged to keep adding value and making sure they are not seen simply as cost centers in the organization. So, what are some of your strategies and advice you would have for legal leaders out there to say, this have been, this is part of what helped me be successful and earn the respect of those executives that I worked with?
Yeah, that goes to brand, right? It's what kind of legal support, what's your brand of service that you seek to provide as an individual and as a collective, right? And that brand has to be, practical. It has to be with a deep, deep understanding of the business objectives in mind. And it really has to be presented in a way that is understood by the people who are supposed to receive the advice, and that is the business, right? So, growing up in law firms, we are usually shielded as a junior because we're reporting to lawyers, and so we can be as legalistic as we need to. And I recall memos I've drafted as a summer student or articling student that I cringe just imagining what I probably wrote, because they were so focused on a legal topic. And I remember one time I actually submitted it, in their mailbox on my last day as a summer student, because I didn't like what I prepared, but it was such a specific legal point without any business context. I wasn't given that, but I also didn't know well enough to ask for that. Like, who's the client, not just who, but why are they asking this particular question at this particular time? And I didn't have that context. And so for me, it's kind of okay. If I could have redraft that memo now, it'd be much, much better. But then over the years, you realize, like I recall, providing legal advice to CEOs, and where they look at me, with a perplexed face, because I realized then that while the analysis I did was relevant, how I spat it out was irrelevant to someone with short on time and who really just wanted to understand the outcome. And so it taught me a lot about communicating, right? Like, how do you communicate what you've done and what the analysis is in a way that actually makes sense? Oftentimes, it doesn't need that as many words as you would imagine. It's quite simple and you're backed up, but you're ready for the questions because you know that you've done the work, right? But spitting it out just loses the message altogether. And also for me, it's just always important to understand the business, right? Coming new into an organization, it's really deep dive into what are the fundamentals, like what are the factors influencing the whole industry, and how does the company play in that industry? What are the risks and opportunities for the specific company? Not just the current risk, but what are the emerging risks that I can think of given, all the changes that continue to happen? But yeah, what are the opportunities? Because law is not just about protecting the company, it's about supporting and enabling in a sense, right? And so if a lawyer is too focused on the specific risk that they're fearful of without understanding the whole business and where it's trying to go, it can really be lost in translation, right? It doesn't sit well with a business, with people that are ready to move forward. When you're trying to hold back without the full picture, it just feels, not at all relevant. And so when you understand the business though, and you understand all of the risks, and for me it's always a blend of law and business. Like there's no specific route anymore, because if I provide legal advice without the business in mind, I'm not providing the right advice,
For sure.
right? And so
For
I
sure.
really encourage all of my team members to really have that more commercial lens. So they could be a litigator, but I really want them to grow on the commercial lens. Like what exactly, where are the opportunities, right? And not just what are we worried about, but where can we grow, and how do we do it in a prudent way, for sure, but how do we do so in a way that you know um, forces us as lawyers to open our eyes to what is within the realm of possibility, as opposed to just what holds us back. And business is just like that. It's taking risks, taking measured risks, mitigating where you can or need to, but also taking risks, because no real progress can be made without taking any risk. And you're a business person, Gary, so I'm sure, yeah, that's sort of how you roll as well, right?
No, and for sure. And I mean, any business, there's a healthy amount of risk that you have to consider as you take certain actions, because you're never risk proof no matter what you do, right? By
Mhm.
definition, the larger the organization is, the more there are inherent risks that come with it. Karen, I'm going to pivot to a part of our podcast that we call the rapid fire questions. So these are sort of first word that comes to mind, and uh, the uh, and the as I do this, I will come back to you with one last question as we complete this portion, and it'll be: if you were to predict the energy space 10 years from now, does it look any different? If so, what does it look like? Knowing that while you're covering the legal side, you have a lot of exposure to the business front. So some of that predictive, putting a predictive hat on the business side I'd be curious to hear, and I'm sure our audience would as well. But let's move on to rapid fire question. We'll come back to that as our last item. How many languages do you speak?
3: Cantonese, Spanish, and English.
And I must say, I haven't tested your Cantonese, but your Spanish is quite good. And what is your favorite word?
Um, I don't really know. In Spanish, it's esperanza, hope.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the questions I was going to ask you, what is your favorite word in another language? So that actually
Okay,
covers, you cover
it's
two in
gonna
one. I
cover
love
both. Excellent.
it. What word do you hate?
Impossible.
I could have thought, if I were to say what language is Karen, or what word is Karen, impossible is what I would have pegged you to say. What word do you have a hard time pronouncing, if any?
Yeah, Worcestershire sauce. I think that's what it's called.
I, th- I think the entire world has a hard time saying that one.
I know. There's just too many letters to. Yeah, I don't even know if that's even the right way to say it, but it's in my fridge.
Oh, I love that one. And what's one word to describe yourself by?
Optimistic.
Yeah, that also adds up. I could have seen that as well. Uh,
Good.
so,
I'm glad
Karen,
it's not surprising.
yes, yes, of course. So I'll get back to the question that I told you about before we came to the rapid fire question. So 10 years from now, what does the energy space look like?
Well, in 10 years, I do believe and hope that there will be, for the Canadian economy, that there's going to be a lot of egress beyond, just going to the States, but like off our shores, and really going into the countries that really, really need energy, our particular produced energy, right? And it goes to fuel their way of life as well, but also to displace coal and other, you know, energy sources that are not as responsibly produced, and not as as I guess positive as, say, natural gas would be, for example,
For
for the
sure.
economy, right, and for the environment. So that's what I believe. I was hoping 10 years ago that that would be the case today, but I honestly feel, yeah, today the discourse is different. The understanding, I think, within the all of Canada, that it is not just something that is specific to a few provinces, but that it is important for our whole entire country to get behind and rally behind. And there's a real purpose for that. And I think everything should be purposeful. And I think if we just have to focus on the global context, we can understand why that is really important. So that's my prediction and my hope.
No, and I think that makes a lot of sense, Karen. And one thing I've learned being working with executives in the energy space is that things take time to materialize, just because it can be so infrastructure heavy and regulatory requirements, etc.
Mhm.
So it's almost like some of these things would have to happen now to see the effects 10 years
Absolutely.
from. So. Well, Karen, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. It's we could have continued like this for a much longer period of
For
time,
sure.
the part that is fun is that there's always more to share, and it'll give us other opportunities.
Thank you so much, Gary, for having me. I mean, such a pleasure always to chat with you, and thank you for having me on your podcast.